All right, everybody. My next guest here on this week's edition of the Phillip Jordan Show, I am joined by AJ Spurr, college football for USA Today. He's going to help us out with the Alabama side of the Iron Bowl. We may get into some other SEC related topics, but AJ, I appreciate you coming on the show.
Well, Philip, thank you so much for having me. It's been a wild season, and there's plenty to talk about with only 1 week left to go. So, we'll see how things pan out.
Yeah, I'm sure nothing outrageous or anything's going to happen in these next regular season week, rivalry weekend coming up this week, and of course, with the championship games coming up next week. I'm sure nothing's going to be just thrown all over the place.
Yeah, it's really coming down to the wire, not just for a couple of teams. We're talking entire conferences, and really because we're still trying to feel out how this new 12-team playoff format, is. No one really knows what to expect. How much does one loss mean? There's people talking about whether or not it would be advantageous for teams to miss out on their respective conference championships. So, like I said, we're going to have to wait and see what happens this upcoming week. We already know the fate of a couple teams with respect to conference titles, but, anything goes at this point.
Yeah, I think, going into the year when the 12-team playoff, we knew it was coming. Everybody talked about, okay, games are not going to mean as much and all that stuff. Those people were badly wrong because we had just so many games that mean so much. And I don't feel like we've lost what makes college football, where the sense of urgency with all these games.
I agree. And I'll say this. Do I think that we've lost all meaning of regular season games? Not at all, because the meaning has just changed a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Before, where there were only 4 teams playing, you had to go either undefeated or have one single loss, and it better be an early season loss against a competitor, or else you can kiss your season goodbye. Where we're at now is it's still a feeling out period with the playoffs and what losses mean, and with it being so arbitrary, with an actual committee being the group that determines which 12 teams are the top 12 teams, every year something different is valued. Is it strength of schedule? Is it, how quality of your losses are? Things like that. No one really knows where they stand. So at a time like this, we can sit here and say the games mean just as much, whereas I would argue the games mean something different. We're just not sure what they mean and the weight that they have in certain wins and certain losses and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just, again, we mentioned this week's going to be eyeballs all on the games and, of course, championship weekend. And let's talk about something that happened this past weekend. We recorded this early in the week. So Alabama losing to Oklahoma 24-3. I did not have this one on my bingo card, AJ. I did not foresee Alabama losing Oklahoma. I thought, okay, Oklahoma's got a really good defense. So maybe in their home, maybe perhaps that defense can keep them in the game for a little bit. But Alabama's offense has been so explosive, even in the other losses against Vanderbilt, against Tennessee. But Oklahoma just line. I mean, I'll say it. They whipped Alabama up front, both getting
Mm-hmm.
after Milroe. He only had 7 rushing yards. I mean, obviously what they did to him, and he had his struggles with the passing game. And then just the way Oklahoma didn't even throw for 70 yards in the game, but they ran for 257 yards, just dominating up front on the offensive side. When you look back at Alabama's loss to Oklahoma, just how shocking was you that that game went the way it went?
I'll say this. I wasn't necessarily super shocked that they lost. I think coming into this season, that was a game that I had marked as one to watch. Of course, Oklahoma's season has not gone the way a lot of, Sooner fans would have hoped. However, they've had their ups and their downs, more downs than ups. But, here we are. They defeated Alabama. They rushed the field. They're all happy. Brent Venables maybe lives to see another season in Norman. I was shocked, however, by the sheer domination that Oklahoma displayed. And what I find interesting is it's not that people are now talking about, well, maybe Oklahoma has kind of shifted the narrative around their program or their season for 2024. The focus has really stayed on Alabama, which with this being the third loss, it doesn't help because now you can put the Vanderbilt, Tennessee, and Oklahoma game under a microscope. But you mentioned it. Jalen Milroe having only 7 rushing yards despite 15 rushing attempts is absurd. The offensive play calling in this game, I mean, it had my jaw on the floor by halftime. I could not understand the rhyme or reason behind absolutely anything. Like, this Oklahoma team is not a bad team. This is a quality SEC program that, they've suffered a couple ugly losses along the way, but they've shown what they're capable of and the talent is there. Alabama, however, this is a must-win game. We saw it just a couple weeks ago when they went over to Death Valley to take on LSU. That was a college football playoff elimination game, and they showed up for it. They played that game like their season depended on it because it did. This past week, maybe it was rat poison. Maybe it was poor preparation from the coaching staff. Maybe it was a combination of a plethora of things. But, Phillip, as we sit here today, we can confidently say that Alabama team, in its entirety, coaching staff and roster, was not ready to take on Oklahoma. They did not enter that game with a must-win mindset. It's like they got past LSU, breezed by Mercer, and, smooth sailing from there. Now, we got the Iron Bowl coming up this next weekend, and I would say Alabama fans have good reason to at least be somewhat nervous, because if there's not a national championship berth on the line, at the very least, you win your in-state rivalry. Well, Hugh Freeze almost did it last year. We'll see what they're able to do this season.
Yeah, and before we jump into the Iron Bowl, Jalen Milroe this year, and that was the big question coming. Okay, with Kalen DeBoer coming in, how would he work with Milroe in Milroe's development? And we've seen Milroe this year. AJ, it feels like there's no in between with Jalen Milroe. He is really great, or he's kind of not maybe as bad as we saw against Oklahoma, but still bad at times. So there's no in between with him. It's either really great or really bad.
I agree, and I think that's, general consensus at this point, which a lot of people argue is hurting drastically his NFL draft stock. I mean, just a couple of weeks ago, we were talking Milroe for Heisman, Milroe top 10 NFL draft pick in 2025. Now there's talks of maybe he should consider playing another season of college football. And, all things related to Heisman are out the window. When we're talking about Jalen Milroe and what his skill set offers, it really depends on the skill position players you put around him that he can utilize, and an offensive line that is at least strong enough to give him a little bit of time, because he's not a pure pocket passer. He is able to, elude defenders. He's able to extend plays with his legs and get a little bit creative. I mean, off script, he's hit or miss. And I think that is where we're seeing a lot of these issues. And Nick Sheridan this season has done, a questionable job. I would say for the most part, people have been happy with the job that he's done. But, you look back at Oklahoma, and that's what people are going to remember from this season, not, necessarily the LSU game where they put on a spectacle. We turn back to 2023 with Tommy Rees. A lot of people might say he was holding back Jalen Milroe. I'm curious to see what the narrative is going to be about Sheridan and really this whole offensive staff moving forward when we look back on the 2024 season. Ryan Williams is going to be a true sophomore next season. There's a whole bunch of other skill position players that are coming in that are going to light up the offense as young players. So whether it's with Milroe or not, we're going to have discussions in the future looking back to a season like this because of how wild and historic it really was.
Yeah, it really has been. And, because you look at all the skill position, the running backs, the receivers. I mean, they're an explosive offense, but, again, at times they've seemed like they get bogged down. And, looking at head coach Kalen DeBoer, that was obviously a difficult task following Nick Saban. And we're just 11 games in. So I'm not going to be one of these saying he's not going to succeed at Alabama overall or not. I'm just not going to say that about him, because it's a different era of college football now that he came in at Alabama also. But just looking at the first 11 games, what he has done this year, they look great at home. On the road, except for LSU, kind of questionable at times. How would you grade Kalen DeBoer so far?
Oh, that's a great question. It's hard. And I mean, that's a cop-out answer, but when you determine what success is, you have to take everything into account, right? You mentioned this is a different season in college football overall. We've got the playoff expansion, conference realignment, NIL and transfer portal stuff is getting stronger each and every season. And obviously he's having to fill the shoes of the greatest college football head coach in history. So maybe if you take it from the perspective of the expectation is to go undefeated and at least appear in the national championship game, obviously you wouldn't consider this season a success, and maybe you would say Kalen DeBoer is not the guy for the Crimson Tide. However, if you look at it from a glass half full perspective, we're looking at a head coach who entered a historic program replacing Nick Saban amidst all these changes and managed to defeat a number 2 ranked Georgia team, managed to absolutely demolish LSU on the road, and even look at games like Wisconsin. That's a quality win over a Power 4 conference opponent. The issue with Kalen DeBoer in that respect is the lack of consistency. Okay, they have those super strong wins, but then you lose to Vanderbilt. You're expected to at least compete with Tennessee. You lose on the road there. And then a, struggling Oklahoma team that had fired its offensive coordinator mid-season ran laps around you.
Mm-hmm.
And now with 1 week to go, you're hanging on by a thread to any hopes of making the postseason. And a lot of people are already focusing on the 2025 season. So I would give Kalen DeBoer a B minus. Barely a C plus, but you round up, you give him a B minus. It's not a bad season by any means. This is a top 15 team, and we'll have to see how he adjusts moving forward. There are a lot of things I think a lot of fans would like to see him do differently, but I guess the biggest thing to harp on here would be consistent in your message, in your effort, in your preparation, everything like that.
Yeah, it's definitely been a season of highs and lows for him. 'Cause as you mentioned, beating Georgia, and then to go into Baton Rouge and winning like he did in that, like we said earlier, that was a playoff eliminated game. And then obviously the road losses. I think if you look at the Tennessee one, obviously no Alabama fan wants to lose to Tennessee. I know that. But at the same time, that's a really good team. He lost by 7. But the Vanderbilt loss, I know Vanderbilt's better, but still Alabama shouldn't lose to Vanderbilt. And then, of course, like you said, just the way they lost against Oklahoma. So it is kind of like one of the seasons that's full of, mixed bag. But when you look at it going into the Iron Bowl, they still have an opportunity to get to the playoff. Now, I'll let everybody know, just the disclaimer, we recorded this conversation before the playoff rankings come out. But with everything that happened last weekend, going into this Iron Bowl game, there's still more than just a state championship to play for.
By all means. And I think it's important to remember, especially for local Alabama fans and, Auburn fans who are local and maybe Alabama haters. There's a whole world of college football outside of the Yellowhammer State, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when you take into consideration the way other teams have performed, I mean, Phillip, there was no undefeated SEC teams after week 8,
mm-hmm.
right? I mean, the SEC went up in flames early on, and it's not that they were all playing poorly. It was just that as a conference overall, everybody seemed very competitive outside of just a few programs. And you can even take that to the Big 12, the Big 10, outside of a couple teams. And really the ACC is a 3-man race to the top, which we'll see how whoever wins that conference, and if they can get 2 teams in somehow, how they perform against other power conference opponents. College football overall has been so strange this year that, yes, Alabama may have a bad season compared to the expectations of Alabama fans, but they're still not fully out of it because other teams have been having similar seasons, maybe not to the extent Alabama has had, but nobody's perfect except Penn State and Oregon at this point. So we'll have to see what happens, but to say Alabama is completely out of the running is just a flat out lie. It's more likely than not that they end up playing a bowl game that's not in the college football playoff, but who knows what's going to happen, like we said, this upcoming week, as well as during a conference champions.
Yeah, we spent a lot of time talking about the Alabama coming into this, and obviously that topic there. But the Iron Bowl, and you would have asked me a couple weeks ago with this game, and of course, everybody knows, just throw it out there. People don't, for some reason, if they don't, I do cover Auburn for Last Word College Football. But you would have told me that Auburn had a shot at winning this game. I was like, no, Auburn's probably getting ready for the off season, trying to keep that top five signing class intact, figuring out who's going to be the portal quarterback, staff changes, all that stuff. But look, I saw them play Louisiana Monroe. They played really well, but you're kind of like, okay, that's Louisiana Monroe. But then the way they play against A&M, it seems like the Auburn offense is clicking right now versus Alabama kind of coming this game with that loss against Oklahoma. What is your read on this Iron Bowl, obviously, particularly on the Alabama side of things?
Well, you have two teams, like you said, trending in opposite directions. Alabama is kind of on that downhill slope, whereas Auburn, though it's this late in the season, is really finally putting things together. And then you also have to take into account Auburn is fighting for a chance to be bowl eligible this week. They're only at 5 wins. They got to get to 6. Alabama is trying to at least remain somewhat close to being in playoff contention. So even though there's two different goals for these teams, to get to their respective goal, they've got to do the exact same thing. You got to win the football game. And look, Hugh Freeze is not a coach that's intimidated by Alabama. Of course, Nick Saban's no longer on the sideline, but he doesn't really seem, whether it's at Auburn or, during his time at Ole Miss, he's not one to back down from, the behemoth that is the Crimson Tide and Bryant-Denny Stadium. So I think both of these programs, and also not to mention that Kalen DeBoer in his first Iron Bowl, right? So you've got a lot of factors here to consider, and we didn't even name any players yet. These are all just external factors, right? Yeah. It's going to be a showdown, and I would expect it to be at least a decent game. I think if this game was, over on the Plains, it would be a completely different story. I think, Phillip, I'd be on here talking about how Auburn might run away with the football game in the, third quarter or something like that, because you can never necessarily expect what's going to happen at Jordan-Hare. But because this is in Tuscaloosa and it's such a big game, you got to give the edge to Alabama, which is wild to say. And anybody who's not too familiar with the Iron Bowl might be saying, what are you talking about? Auburn's, they're on pace to have a losing season, and Alabama is 8-3 in still technically in playoff contention. All that, none of that matters when you're talking about the Iron Bowl. Anything can happen. More so at Jordan-Hare, but still kind of at Bryant-Denny. So who knows?
Yeah, and it's interesting because when you look at the rivalry, I mean, Alabama has won 6 straight at home in the rivalry, and pre-Nick Saban, they never won against Auburn Tuscaloosa. That's the weird thing about it, which, of course, a lot of people, a little history lesson for the people out there, prior to like 2000, Alabama usually played their home game at Birmingham. So it's not that big of a record Auburn had at Bryant-Denny as I'm making that out to be, but it was still there. But, since the comeback, Alabama has won all these games at Tuscaloosa. And, AJ, they haven't been close. I mean, maybe outside of 14 when it was, 55-44, Alabama won that one. Mm-hmm. I looked at the numbers at somewhere around Alabama's averaging 46 points. Auburn's averaging 20. So that's also the thing with this rivalry. Like, all the great games have been over in Auburn. Alabama's pretty much dominated the series at home since that Cam Newton comeback in 2010.
Well, look, if we're talking about the lack of consistency with Kalen DeBoer, that's got to be at the forefront. Nick Saban preached, focus on the game ahead of you, the opponent in front of you, as you get ready for the remainder of the season. Kalen DeBoer, this is his first Iron Bowl. Obviously, he knows that it means something to the programs, the fans, and just, the citizens of the state of Alabama. It means something, and he gets that. But it's a matter of, can he get the team prepared fundamentally for this matchup? Because we know he can get the team ready for the big games against Georgia and LSU and all that. But what has he been missing when it comes to facing a Vanderbilt, when it comes to facing a struggling Oklahoma team? And, on paper, put everything we know about the rivalry aside, this is an Auburn team that has not had a great season. This is, everything is lining up to have Auburn be team number 4 in the short list of programs that Alabama has had to face this season that really aren't threats in the playoff race, if that makes any sense. It's about getting the team ready on the field, not just, all rah, roll tide over War Eagle or anything like that. It's not just about pride. It's about the fundamentals, getting down to it, practicing like you're playing the game. And really, I'm not, sitting there at practice, holding Kalen DeBoer's hand. So I don't know what has been missing in those matchups, but for Alabama fans' sake, you better hope he does something differently in preparation for this Saturday.
Yeah, we've gone 20 minutes. We haven't really talked about the players on the field in this game. So looking at it, obviously, Deontay Lawson, that's a big loss for Alabama. And we just saw this past Saturday against Oklahoma. Oklahoma was very successful running the football against the Alabama defense. We know Auburn wants to do that with Jarquez Hunter. But Oklahoma really didn't have any kind of threat in the passing game. Well, Auburn's gotten better with that last couple of weeks with the emergence of freshman Cam Coleman. Then you have Keandre Lambert-Smith on the outside. How do you see Alabama combating what Auburn is now presenting offensively?
Well, look, the loss of Deontay Lawson is huge for this program and really just this last game for the regular season. We'll see what happens in the postseason. As far as how the defense needs to attack Auburn, you have to focus on the run game, but you cannot by any means discredit Peyton Thorne in this offense as far as the passing game is concerned. Hugh Freeze and his coaching staff is going to watch so much film on those 3 losses to see what exactly Alabama was missing on the defensive side of the ball that the opposing offenses were able to exploit and take full advantage of. It's funny that the one loss that Alabama has had that I really want to, drive home here is that Vanderbilt game. That Vanderbilt offense was nothing grandiose. It wasn't, the prettiest thing on earth. It was far from it. But Diego Pavia and that short passing game absolutely dominated Alabama. The options that they ran could not be met at all for some reason by Kane Wommack, the defensive coordinator for Alabama. And it blew my mind because as I sit and I watch these games, I like to think, okay, if I was in the booth, and obviously, Phillip, I am far from qualified to go near any coordinator booth. But I like to think if that was me, how would I try to attack that? And Vanderbilt figured it out quick. I mean, that was their game plan going into it, and they did not have to stray from it. So if Auburn either wants to mimic what Vanderbilt did, or maybe they want to do something of their own that has not yet been done, at least on a consistent basis. Maybe they saw something in a couple games where Alabama couldn't really defend it all too well, but the offensive players didn't have the ability to successfully get, those certain types of passes down, or, those blocking packages down. Auburn has the talent and they have the drive. They want to beat Alabama. Everybody wants to beat Alabama, but probably no team more than Auburn, right? So they will figure out a way to get it done. And with this banged up Alabama defense that, by the way, has shown that if they get frustrated, they will commit penalties. So don't be shocked if you see this Auburn team trying to rattle this defense in more ways than just trying to move the ball down the field. Especially we talked about this at length before. A player like Malachi Moore, he's very emotional. He's very passionate about the game. If you make one mistake, boom, you're granting Auburn 15 yards down the field. So I think it becomes a mental game just as much as a physical game and trying to outsmart, the other coaches and coordinators.
And on the other side, and we mentioned Jalen Milroe, the up and down nature of his play. When he's on, he is great, but when he struggles, he really does struggle, as we talked about earlier in our conversation. And just for me, watching Auburn play every game, I have seen running quarterbacks give them problems. Marcel Reed gave them problems last week. I mean, A&M really moved the ball up and down the field on Auburn. Even when Auburn was up 21-0, there was a missed field goal, then just a bad pass, yes, but they were moving the ball prior to his interception. So they had success against Auburn. So I look at the position players, I think Alabama obviously is a step up in position players over what Texas A&M has at running back and at
Mhm.
wide receiver. How do you see that part of the matchup with Auburn and Alabama when Alabama's on offense?
Look, you can't discount Jalen Milroe's abilities when he's on, right? He is one of the most electric players in college football when he's able to effectively, move the ball down the field, when he's able to go through all of his reads, and especially when there's quality blocking. If they want to have some designed quarterback runs, they can run those better than any other team in college football. However, when they can't, it's not going anywhere. And it's on Nick Sheridan, the offensive coordinator, to say, hey, we have to adjust. We have to change something at halftime. We have to change something in between quarters. We've got to figure it out. Looking at, this matchup in particular, I want to see what Auburn does with Alabama's receivers, knowing that Alabama has such an effective run game with, Justice Haynes and Jam Miller. Because you have those two guys in the backfield, Ryan Williams is going to be one of the biggest threats, if not the biggest threat, that they faced all season. And not to mention, there are other receivers on this team that are just as good and, mind you, more experienced than Ryan Williams, and they've played in Iron Bowls before. They know the environment, they know the atmosphere, and they know what to expect. So for them, it's going to come down to just executing the plays as they are given to them. For Ryan Williams, there's going to be that added pressure really coming into this game. But Auburn's had quality defensive backs in the past that have been able to, contain these massive names that have come out of Alabama as far as wide receivers are concerned. So even if this season isn't great for the Auburn secondary, I wouldn't be shocked if in this game they enter it with a game plan to hone in on the passing game. But like I said, it's going to be interesting to see how they balance that with the threat of an effective run game.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things to look at when this game is over and for the next 2 to 3 years, as long as both these guys stay at their schools are at now, the whole Cam Coleman and Ryan Williams thing, like who's going to have the better game? Because there's going to be some
Mm-hmm.
a little bit of one-on-one rivalry with what both of those guys want to do and how talented both of them are. So I'm not going to ask you to give a prediction, but just you know, let you do that on, in your own space or whatever, or later on in the week. Not put too much pressure on you or anything to make a prediction. But I'll say it like this: we wake up Sunday morning, Alabama won the Iron Bowl. What's the one thing you think happened that led to that victory?
If Alabama won the Iron Bowl,
Yes.
I think it's that Jalen Milroe had himself a game. I think it's a bounce back opportunity for him. And really, he orchestrates that offense to a point where if he's not on, Jam Miller and Justice Haynes aren't going to be as effective because the defense can step up a little bit more. The wide receivers aren't going to be getting the ball as cleanly as they might if he is having a great game. And then that really does put a lot of stress on the defense because they'll probably be on the field a little bit more and having to, expend a lot of energy and a lot of time. And, who knows what the Auburn offense is going to look like in this game, because this is the opportunity to try something new. So if I had to pinpoint the exact reason why I think Alabama will win this game, the biggest reason, Jalen Milroe had himself a game.
It's going to be interesting. It's going to. I think we're in for a classic Saturday. I fully believe that. I'm not hedging. Everybody's going to have to wait to the end of the show to find out who I'm picking to win this game. But anyway, I think it's going to be a classic, and it's going to be fun. And this has been fun, AJ, having you on. I probably told you 15, 20. We've gone 28 minutes in this conversation, but it's been a lot of fun, and I appreciate you taking the time. If people wanted to check out, where can they follow you?
Well, they can follow me on X, or formerly known as Twitter, at Spurr FM, Spurr FM, like the radio dial. And they can check out collegesportswire.usatoday.com for all things college football and now college basketball, now that the season's going on, throughout the remainder of this season and as the basketball season gets underway.
Absolutely. Everybody go check out AJ, all the great work he does covering college football. And AJ, appreciate the time, and hope we can do this again sometime down the road.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It's always a blast.